Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Darian Jones. I'm the Caregiver Education and Digital Specialist at Care Partners. We have a very special guest today, Miss Angela Odensky. She's an attorney. She's here to answer our questions about Medicaid. We know it can be kind of an overwhelming topic at times, so she's here to kind of break it down for us and answer all of your questions. So she's actually going to be here this week and next week. So if you have questions that you think of during the week, save them and bring them back next week. So we'll be here again at the same time. Before we get started, I wanted to do a really quick update on Care Partners. So we are continuing to monitor the coronavirus situation, and we have decided to suspend all of our in-person programming until the end of June. So we've pushed it back just a little bit, but it's just because we're continuing to watch. And at the end of the day, our whole goal is to make sure that you guys are safe. But in the meantime, we will be continuing to provide all of these online resources, hot topic segments, at-home gathering place guide, and activity calendar. So be sure to visit our website for more information. And you can also email us with all of your pictures and what you guys are up to. We would love to see and hear from you. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started on today's segment, and I'll introduce our speaker for the day. Hi, how are you this morning, Angela? Oh, wait, hold on.
Me.
There we go. Hi, Angela. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. So will you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I am an estate planning and elder law attorney in Bel Air area of Houston, Texas. I help families who are trying to navigate the Texas Health and Human Services system to get long-term care benefits for loved ones. That has kind of been a passion of mine since I had to help my dad. Actually, I helped my mom with the process for my dad when my dad needed to go into skilled nursing care. And I realized at that time that there was a lot of really confusing information out there and that I could be a help to a lot of people if I just did that and made that my focus. And so that is the focus of my law firm, is to help people sort of navigate this process. And I think that yeah, it's been a good choice that I made to do this.
Yeah, it's what you do is really important, and it helps so many people. I know that this information can be a little overwhelming, as I said, and so having an expert who not only has personal experience but also professional experience, I think, is really great. So we'll go ahead and get started with this segment if you want to just take it away.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the most important thing to realize off the top is that there are many, many, many Medicaid programs in Texas. And so all of the information that I'm going to give today is specifically limited to long-term care Medicaid. So if you have a friend or a cousin or a neighbor who's getting a certain Medicaid benefit and you want to get that same benefit for your loved one, it may not be appropriate. They may have completely different circumstances. And so it's really important to kind of keep it in mind that this is just long-term care Medicaid. And so what does long-term care Medicaid cover? What does it mean? So it is a federal program that is managed by each state. So if you've seen one state's Medicaid program, you've seen one state's Medicaid program. So if you have a loved one moving from Florida and they were on Medicaid in Florida, they may not qualify for Medicaid in Texas. The same with California, Illinois, whatever. Every state's going to be different, which is why getting information off the internet can be somewhat dangerous, because there's so much out there, and it has to be specific to your circumstances, to where you live, to what's happening in your life and your loved ones' lives. So that's kind of the basics of the Medicaid program. In Texas, long-term care Medicaid covers skilled medical needs. So what that means is skilled nursing or nursing homes, long-term care facilities. We also have a waiver program, which you can apply for, or you can get on the interest list or wait list, and it can cover some home health care or assisted living care if the applicant meets all the qualifications. So what are the qualifications, right? So it doesn't cover a lot of an assisted living. I have to say that it covers assisted living facilities who accept it. And so like in Houston, there's only a couple of assisted living facilities who accept the Medicaid program. So it's hard to find them. But when you do find them, they're such a gem to have. So what are the qualifications? First, you have to be a Texas resident, and you have to have and be a U.S. citizen or resident alien. You have to meet the medical necessity prong of the qualifications, meaning that you have or your loved one has a persistent medical condition that requires skilled care. What that means is up to interpretation. Generally speaking, if you have a loved one's going into a skilled nursing facility, the skilled nursing facility will do an assessment, and they will tell you if they think that they will meet medical necessity, and then they give that assessment to Texas Health and Human Services, and they usually accept it. The same with assisted living. When it comes to trying to get home health care, a caseworker will come out to the house, will do the assessment, and sometimes they will meet medical necessity and sometimes they won't. Usually it's somebody who needs significant care with multiple activities of daily living, medication management, those sort of everyday things. I get calls from people who are like, my mom needs someone to stay with her during the day while we're at work because she can't be by herself and we can't stay home all day. And so we want to apply for Medicaid to have someone come and sit with mom. Generally speaking, that is not going to meet the medical necessity qualification. There would have to be more than just the need of someone to come and stay with mom. And so it is a pretty high standard in terms of medical need. Once medical necessity is established, then we move to the financial piece. And the financial piece is often where elder law attorneys will come in because the financial rules can be very complicated and difficult to understand. There are different rules for single individuals versus couples. This is one of the common myths I think that I've seen, I've heard from people is, as a couple, we're going to have to spend everything down to $2,000 and that's it. And it's like, well, no, that's actually not true. The $2,000 countable asset limit is for single individuals. Couples have completely different requirements in terms of how their finances can work. And there's a lot more planning opportunities for couples because I think there is an understanding that you don't want to leave somebody at home who cannot then take care of themselves. You want to make sure that the well spouse who stays at home is able to do the things that they need to do to maintain their own existence while still finding and having care for the loved one who needs to be in a sort of a facility setting. So couples and individuals are going to be different. And there's a lot of planning that can go into a couple situation to kind of preserve assets for the well spouse. Another sort of myth or misconception I have heard when it comes to couples, and this is from very well-meaning individuals who are just trying to help. They say, only if you're going to apply, you only have to include the information for the financial information for the actual accounts and assets in the spouse's name that's going into the facility. And that's all you have to include. You don't have to include anything else. That is not true. As a matter of fact, that is fraudulent and it could include criminal penalties. So it's important that if there is a spousal situation in which one spouse is applying for Medicaid, all assets have to be accounted for. Not all of them are going to count. Not all of them are going to count against the spouse going into the institution. There are definitely rules for everything, but you have to declare all of it. You can't leave anything out. In the Medicaid context, there's no such thing as community versus separate property. So even if you have a marital agreement that separates your property, it does not matter. If you have an inheritance from your family that is never supposed to go to the person in the to your spouse who's in the facility, it doesn't matter. Those assets all count. Everything counts, and then we figure out what we need to do with them. So two sort of spousal misconceptions there. One, that you have to spend everything down, or two, that the one spouse's doesn't matter. Neither of those things are true. There are definitely things that we can do to preserve assets, but we have to declare them all. Everything has to be on that qualification. So once you, I could get the numbers, unfortunately, can get a little bit overwhelming. And so there is a floor for couples, there is a floor and there is a ceiling, meaning that if your assets as a couple are under around 25,000, then your assets will not be counted, and you can just file the application with those assets. It's important to understand assets and income are treated differently. They are two separate things. So income, which is Social Security, it is retirement income, IRAs, anything that's in required minimum distributions, that kind of income is attributable only to the spouse that it goes to, and it's not attributable to the other spouse at all, but assets are counted together. So that's the distinction. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, is that they assume it's either all counted together or all counted separate. And that's not the case. It's income is counted separately, assets are counted together. The asset limit for an individual is $2,349 gross. So when you are moving forward with an application, or when you are moving forward, you have to understand that that means gross and not net. So when you get your Social Security deposit into the bank, that is your net after Medicare premiums have been taken out, etc. That you have to go back and get the gross amount. And when you are preparing some kind of an application, they want everything. They want all the bank statements with the pages that even say, this page was intentionally left blank. They want that. And so all of that goes in there with everything that you have. A spouse at home, if there are, so the $2,349 is an individual limit for income. If you have more than that in income, but your assets are fine, then there are planning things that we can do. It doesn't mean that you are going to be disqualified completely. It means that we have to do things with your income to make sure that they will cover. So I guess the important take homes are income is separate, assets are together. There are certain limits on both, but there are also planning opportunities to help preserve assets for a spouse and still get care for a loved one. Another important thing to understand is that Medicare does not cover long-term care services. I know that Darian has said that you've had some Medicare specialists come and talk to you, and so I'm sure that they've all kind of mentioned this, or I hope that they've mentioned this in some way. But I have definitely had clients who have been under the impression that their Medicare supplement was going to cover their long-term care needs, and that is not the case. There are only three ways that long-term care needs are covered. One is privately pay. You just pay with your own income and assets. Two is long-term care insurance. And three is through the Medicaid program. And for the most part, the Medicaid program is the number one payer of all long-term care in the country. And so generally speaking, most people are going to need to go through the Medicaid system at some point in time to receive benefits. So that's kind of the basics of it. There are income limits, there are asset limits. Please do not give your stuff away to meet the asset limits, because that can be found out. And that's a penalty. You get a penalty for giving your things away if you are doing it to qualify for Medicaid. Another misconception that I've had from clients is, oh, well, you can give up to $15,000 a year and there's no issue. Well, that's for taxes. That's not Medicaid. So other areas of law do not touch on Medicaid in the same way, right? So community separate property is family law. It's not Medicaid. $15,000 gift tax return is tax law, not Medicaid. So there's no translation between these kinds of that sort of information and what is allowable with the Medicaid. So if you know that Medicaid is in your future, or you are concerned that Medicaid is in your future, talk to somebody who does this kind of planning. And keep in mind that only an attorney is legally allowed to charge for Medicaid planning. Anybody charging you for Medicaid planning who is not an attorney, they're not legally allowed to do that. Because it is so very, very complex. They want to make sure that the people who are doing it know all the rules very well and are not going to end up jeopardizing your loved one's ability to qualify. Okay, Darian, I think that I'm done with the 101 basics. There's so much more information, it's hard to get it all.
Yeah.
We'll stop there.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, Angela will be back again next week to touch on some more about Medicaid. So if you have some questions now, be sure to leave them in the comments, or come back next week if you think of something during the week and let us know. We did have someone say here's a comment. He'd love to, or she would love to meet with you regarding Medicare, Medicaid. Earlier I had her contact information up on the screen. So for anyone who does want to talk with her further, you can reach her at this number, or there's her website information also. While we're waiting for people to ask their questions, can you qualify? You talked a little bit about it, but can you qualify for Medicaid without knowing it, or can planning help with changing your eligibility?
So you have to affirmatively apply for Medicaid. You can't just, no one's going to give you Medicaid just by virtue of your needing it, right? There are two ways to go about planning. One is kind of this sort of future long-term planning. Sit down with somebody, let them know your concerns, let them know what your income and your assets are, do the math, see if there's some planning that we can do early on to put you in the best possible position if you need to qualify in the future. So this is when you're healthy, you have a concern, you want to do some planning ahead of time. Happy to do that. The other is the crisis planning. It is that time when your loved one has had a catastrophic health event. They have been in the hospital for their for several days or weeks, and now they've gone to the rehabilitation facility, and the family has realized, oh my goodness, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa can't go home by themselves again. What are we going to do? And at that point in time, there are also still planning things that we can do. That is most of my clients. Most of my clients are people who are in that situation where it was unexpected. There was a fall, there was a stroke, there was something that they had never anticipated. And now they are looking down the barrel of $8,000 to $10,000 a month in nursing home bills and wondering how they're going to do that. How is this going to work? And that's when you call somebody. That's when you call somebody and you bring all your bank statements and all of your information, and you talk about everything, every mineral interest that you might own a 32% of, every car you own, even if it's a junker and doesn't run, everything. You bring it in, we look it over, and we see what we can do, what needs to be done to help your loved one qualify. Those are challenging, but very interesting cases to work on for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And then you did also mention this a little bit too, but are there any big or main Medicaid myths that you can think of?
Sure, that Medicare is going to cover long-term care is one of the biggest ones. That Medicaid has some kind of home health care for people who just need a little bit of help. That spouses don't need to, I have one. This one is a big one for me. I hear it all the time. Oh, well, you don't want to go into a Medicaid facility because all Medicaid facilities are awful. Well, most facilities have Medicaid beds. About 96% of the facilities in Houston have both private pay and Medicaid beds. There is no difference in care. It's all the same. And so it's not like applying for Medicaid doesn't mean you're going to get a lower level of care. You're generally going to be in the exact same place as somebody paying $10,000 a month, because there's not that distinction at this point in time. And I think that's a huge myth as well. The last one is, if I apply for Medicaid, the government's going to come take my house. I hear that one all the time. And while we do have Medicaid estate recovery, it's required as part of the federal program. Texas's laws regarding Medicaid estate recovery are actually really generous to the families. And there are some very easy things that we can do up front to help maintain the homestead for the family if necessary. We have a lot of exemptions for Medicaid estate recovery. If there's a living spouse, there's no Medicaid estate recovery. So if it's a spousal situation and one spouse doesn't want to go in because they're afraid if they die, then the other spouse will lose the house, that is not going to happen in Texas. I can't necessarily, I can't speak for any other state, but in Texas, that's not going to happen. And so there are definitely things that we can do. We have planning tools in our toolbox to help keep the house and protect it from Medicaid estate recovery if necessary. So that's another huge myth that I hear, is that the state's going to take my house. And it doesn't have to. There certainly is. Let me explain the Medicaid estate recovery program for just a second. It means that when somebody who's on Medicaid dies, then the state can ask for reimbursement for money spent on their behalf. And so some families will get a bill for, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, et cetera. If there is no estate, meaning there was no money left, then you just tell them there was no money left and they go away. If all there's left is a house and a spouse is living there, you tell them there's a living spouse and they go away, right? And then there are other things that we can do if there's not a living spouse as well. We have to do it on the front end. So it's worth talking to somebody about that as well.
Thank you for dispelling those myths. Excuse me. Those are some really good ones. Can you be on Medicare and Medicaid at the same time?
Sure, absolutely. Dual eligibility. A lot of people are on Medicare and Medicaid at the same time. The Medicare will still cover your generic, your doctor's visits, your hospital visits, et cetera. And the Medicaid covers your long-term care. The long-term care facility or physical therapy or whatever other occupational therapies, et cetera, that you have going on. But there are many, many clients who are dual eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid.
Great. And then I guess we're going to wrap it up for today. We really appreciate everyone joining us and tuning in. As I said, if you have some questions or you think of something during the week, bring them back here. We'd love to answer all of your questions. And Angela, any last thoughts or final things you want to say this week?
Yeah, just remember that it's complicated, but there are professionals who are out there who want to help and who are willing to help. It doesn't have to be an overwhelming anxiety-causing issue that you feel like you have to deal with alone. You're not alone. We are here. We're here to help. This is an area of practice that the people in this area, we do it because it's a calling, right? We do it to help people function and get through this time in their lives. And so it's important to reach out to professionals and just, have a phone conversation, sit down in an office, do a consultation just to see where you're at. You might find that it helps alleviate a lot of stress just to know that you're doing everything right. That could be as helpful as having someone say, oh, well, here's this little issue that I've seen that we're going to have to deal with first.
Yeah, that's some great advice. And that's the last thing I wanted to reiterate too, is if you have questions, the best thing you can do is reach out to a professional, because all the elder law attorneys I've met, like you said, it's their calling. It's something that they love to do. And they really do just want to be able to help you. So, well, thank you so much, Angela, for joining us this week. We are so excited to have you again next week. With that, I think we're going to end it for today, but thank you everyone so much for joining us.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.